This is Limitless Spirit, a practical, inspirational, and thought-provoking weekly podcast about the impact of faith and Christian identity in today's world. And now here's your host, champion of Jesus and people who love him, world traveler and co-founder of World Missions Alliance, Helen Todd.
Welcome to Limitless Spirit Podcast. I'm Helen Todd, and I look forward to spending time with you on this podcast on a weekly basis. Mahatma Gandhi once said, "I like you, Christ. I do not like you, Christians. You Christians are so unlike you, Christ." He was a great humanitarian. I read somewhere that when he moved to South Africa in the early 20th century, a Quaker mission tried to convert him to Christianity. Perhaps this quote alludes to this experience. Now, it's true, we all have encountered the un-Christ-like Christians like he's talking about. In fact, we all, at one point or another, have been those un-Christ-like Christians. In a few minutes, I will share with you a confessional story about my own moment like this. At the same time, through over 2 decades as the Vice President of World Missions Alliance, I had the privilege of meeting some outstanding people in the nations and here in the United States. So what does it mean to be Christ-like in the 21st century? How do we practice meekness without appearing weak? How do we maintain the integrity of our Christian identity when we're challenged? This podcast will explore these questions and much more. As part of my work, I get to travel. I have traveled to the world's hotspots, war zones, areas of natural disasters, and countries where people live under the rule of evil regimes or crumbling economies. I get to share with them the hope and salvation through Christ. I also get to help people discover themselves as they make the decision to step out of the comfort zone and trust God to use them to make a difference. I have come to 2 solid conclusions. Number 1, I'm absolutely convinced that Christianity is the only long-term and the most perfect solution to the suffering and need in today's world. And number 2, I also notice that when Christians share their faith with others, they're at the peak of their calling. It is the most satisfying, significant, and worthy thing we can do in life. In this podcast, I will introduce you to some extraordinary people. Many of them are not the household names that you hear in the news or even on social media, but they are true Christ-like heroes. They are world changers and overcomers, trailblazers, encouragers, and lovers of God and humanity. They inspired me, and I hope they will do the same for you. Now, the big questions. What is your identity in Christ? Is your faith impacting the community and making a difference in the world? Have you tapped into this wonderful, limitless potential within you? If you have asked this of yourself at least once, this podcast is for you. The mind governed by the flesh is death, but the mind governed by the Spirit is life and peace. This is Romans chapter 8, verse 6. So let's think on this for a moment. What governs your mind today? The mind governed by the flesh keeps us confined to the comfort zone. We like to rely on our own resources and our own abilities. But the mind governed by the Spirit removes the obstacles and limitations and gives God complete freedom to work in us and through us. The idea behind this podcast is to create a moment in your busy life for a spiritual reset. So going back to Mahatma Gandhi's quote and my own recent un-Christ-like moment. When flesh takes over, we're the most un-Christ-like in the ways we react to circumstances and people. So here's my confession. If you have flown on an airplane at least once, you know that the middle seat is the least desirable spot on the plane. It means you have to depend on the mercy of the person to one side of you to go to the bathroom and the manners of the person to the other side not to be squished. And yet in this undesirable place, I was reminded of something very important. A few weeks ago, I stood in line to board an early morning flight from Asia home. The flight had been delayed a couple of times, but only 40 minutes in all. I went to the counter to ask about my short layover, and in front of me was a guy in his 30s, and judging by the smell of vomit and alcohol, his morning had started early. He was having a meltdown. He cursed the airline representative, demanding to be let out of the waiting area because he needed a drink. It was 6:30 in the morning. Direct confrontation in Asian culture violates the principle of saving face. So the lady tried to diffuse his anger by speaking in a very low voice. But he mistook her politeness for weakness, and he grew more belligerent. And to everything she said, he yelled, "You're wrong." So I mentally labeled him the most horrible human being. When I finally made it to my seat, I discovered that A, I was assigned the dreaded middle seat, and B, the most horrible human being was slumped in a seat next to mine. Across the aisle, I noticed there was his wife, and she had a cute baby girl in her lap, and she seemed to be very embarrassed by her husband's condition. I leaned away from him, and I kept postponing the trip to the bathroom because I didn't want to talk to him. But in the middle seat, one just can't avoid their neighbor. So when he finally woke up, he reached for the girl and he started playing with her. And she was interested in my purse, so I played with her and we smiled at each other. And then he looked at me and I saw a mix of gratitude and shame. And at that moment, I felt ashamed. He wasn't the most horrible human being. He was my neighbor. He too was made in the image of God. He too was on Christ's mind when he was dying on the cross. Perhaps he was an army vet suffering from PTSD. Perhaps he was a son of abusive parents. He deserved my compassion because he had Christ. And I am grateful for this middle seat experience because it reminded me why I do what I do. The Great Commission doesn't just send us to friendly nations or lovely people. Our faith equips us to bring change to individual lives and even fates of nations, and we have this power if we're willing to bring the flesh under the subjection of the Spirit. And we can make a difference if we're willing to take the uncomfortable middle seat. A great way to nurture the Spirit is to observe the people who live by the Spirit. When I feel discouraged or defeated, I connect or at least remind myself of this kind of people. This podcast hopefully will let you forget for a few minutes about your own struggles and hear the stories of those who have endured, persevered, and won the battle. What got them through? What helped them win? What did they learn through the process? If you're going through a battle, I'm confident these stories and interviews will encourage you. If you need affirmation or a confidence boost to take action and make a difference, I'm confident these stories and interviews will inspire you. In the upcoming episode, we meet with the people who were placed in the most challenging life situation. I look forward to diving into these stories with you. Tune in for the upcoming episodes. In the stories of others, you just might discover the truth about yourself.
Thanks for listening to Limitless Spirit with Helen Todd, produced by World Missions Alliance. Are you ready to step out of your comfort zone? Do you have a passion to help people and share your faith across the globe? Visit our website, rfwma.org, and get involved in the Great Commission through short-term missions. We hope you'll leave a review and check out other episodes. We'll be with you in a week on our next episode of Limitless Spirit.